bit about myself. So I've been with Scales for 2.5 years, but I've worked with the product actually since '98, and even before that, when it was actually codenamed Atlanta. So that's a really long time ago. I'm at what you call technical solutions architect, but I also work on looking at whatever Microsoft sort of pushes towards us, if that's something that we need to uptake within Scales, or is that something that we might leave with others. So that's basically me in a nutshell. So thanks for having me. I can hear I really got my work cut out, because I'm hearing that a lot of people is already looking at it and have been working with the regression tool from Microsoft for quite a while, which is perfect. So we can probably get a frank dialogue of what we think. That's definitely my take on this. So the agenda is basically, some of it you might know, some of it you might not know. So bear with me. It's always difficult to please everybody, but I'll give it a shot. So basically a high-level overview of what the tool is and all the components involved. And then with the October release of Finance and Operations, Microsoft also introduced version 2.0 of the tool. So I'm going to dive a little bit into that, what's new. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the rumors I've heard from Microsoft on what they're working on going forward. So then a little bit about customer learnings. Nothing major. We have to be honest, here in Denmark, it is difficult to get a foot in when we talk about this regression test for various reasons. So that's definitely something that we can touch upon later on. But we are trying to put some kind of offering together to help clients sort of easier get underway with this, because it can be quite a mouthful for some clients, both larger and smaller clients. So I hope you're all okay with this, and I reckon that Paul will sort of control if there's any hands up or anything, because I can't really see that from my point of view here.
No problem at all. I'll do that. No problem.
All right, cheers. So basically, there's a lot of components that you need to look into in order to actually make this work all together. Obviously, you need some kind of finance and operations. And recently, for people involved in the commerce side of things, we also have possibility to do some regression testing around that. But it's these three apps, if you like, that are the main focus of where we can actually use the regression suite automation tool. And that's also one of the biggest limitations with the tool. It's only these three products. But we're using task recording. I think everybody's using task recording. They know about task recording and what it's used for. But when you work with task recordings and you have to make them work in an automated test setup, it's a different story. You need to put in a lot more thought on how you record your tasks. You need to think about, what data am I presenting to other test cases along the way, etc., etc. Obviously, we have the life cycle services, the business process modeler. You need well, Microsoft recommends that you sort of use that as your repository, your placeholder of all the tasks that you record in your task recording. But it is actually possible to skip that if you don't want to use it. But we actually recommend that we use it here in Denmark at Scales, because it gives a nice overview of what you've already recorded, that you don't need to fiddle with, a lot of files somewhere and you're not really in control of what's going on. So we tend to recommend that you use the lifecycle services part to make the whole story working. Obviously, then there's the Azure DevOps. And I just heard there was a session on Azure DevOps. I don't know if you'll be covering tests, but it is an important part that whatever you record and you push through the business process model or library will eventually end up automatically in Azure DevOps as work items of either type epic, feature, or test case. So it will all be pushed in there. And then from there, you could work with it and create your test plans, create your test suites, make it all work, look nice, and make sure that the sequencing of all the test cases are in the right order. And then finally, we get to our our little product, which is the Regression Suite Automation Tool, which is a free tool, and it's just a standalone piece of software. And basically all it does is it'll run those test cases automatically. And you can either run it through the UI, which is shown here, but you can also make, some PowerShell scripts, and then you could run it like, a service kind of scenario. Then you can start it at night and then can come in the morning and have a look as a test manager. So the tool has been, it's not really changed a lot in 2 years it's been available. So Microsoft has spent a lot of time stabilizing, fixing, making it work with all the task recordings that you can do within finance and operations. And there's been a lot of effort. And I think people who's actually worked with the tool on this call will recognize that it's not always been easy to once you have you think something is done, and then there's a new version of the tool, and then it breaks something, or Microsoft introduces new features in the finance and operations side, and then then something breaks in the regression tool. So it's been a long journey. Often going uphill more than downhill, I think. But that's where we are today. It's more stabilizing. They're adding new features instead of just stabilizing the product now. And finally, there are some additional things that's also important to know, that even though the tool will only work within finance, supply chain, and commerce, it's actually also possible to record if you're using the warehousing app. And if you want to record something outside of these apps, then Microsoft leans toward what was, until I think yesterday or the day before, called UI flows. It's now called desktop flows, which is Microsoft's story around robotics process automations. So, and I think we'll be seeing more going in that direction, to sort of covering more and more products from Microsoft. So any comments on that, or you see any hands raised there, Paul?
No answers yet, no. So if anybody's got any questions, then feel free to ask.
Right, I'll carry on then. So it's not just a list of the different, there are other tools available. Well, just to give a quick presentation, that we got the regression tool, and then we have all the robotics that's happening at the moment. But behind the scene is actually a well-known test tool that's running everything. It's the Selenium tool. It's been there for quite a while now, and so Microsoft is basically just hooking into that tool, and that will just handle the actual automation of the tests. We have 3 more tools listed here. They're not really strictly related to the regression test, and still there are tools that Microsoft sees as commendable, or you could use them in conjunction with the regression tool to sort of cover more, to be able to plan more, maybe also create your regression test all the way down from a development perspective from this acceptance test library. And we are definitely seeing the acceptance test library beginning to add more and more value from a development point of view, because we can here easily create, you know, huge processes, but from a development perspective. So we're seeing more and more of that on our projects. So moving forward, this is probably old news to a lot of people, but just to set us everybody on the same page, I heard there was still a couple of newcomers. There is a lot of, you know, nuts and bolts that needs to be tied well together in order to make all the technical setup work. Obviously, we'll have one or several versions of finance operations, and it's sort of used for two things. Obviously, we need to create the task recordings that we would like to eventually transform into test cases. But then again, we also need finance operations to actually be able to execute on those test cases. So there might be different instances of finance operations. We at least we tend to say that we need to have a specific, if you like, a earmarked instance of finance operations that from a application perspective will be similar to the production environment. So we do not recommend that we'll do our testing on a UAT environment, because that UAT environment might not necessarily look exactly like your production environment. And the regression tool is all about making sure that nothing breaks in your production environment at the end of the day. So there are two ways of working with those task recordings. As I mentioned, you can add them to the Lifecycle Services library, or we can actually just download them as, you know, files, and then we can work straight off those files. We can even take those files and push them into Azure DevOps as attachment manually. But we tend to recommend the road going through Lifecycle Services just to get, you know, the repository and make sure that you're in control of what recordings you actually have, and it's easy to control in that sense. Then obviously the big part in Azure DevOps, where you need to orchestrate, you need to structure how all these task recordings will work together. And finally, you got your regression tool and the data that you would use for your tool, for your tests, are separated from the recording into a spreadsheet, a Excel spreadsheet. And I'll touch upon that just later on, but that is definitely the big news of version 2.0, how you would work with that Excel sheet with the test parameters, the data that you actually use. So, and obviously on top of that, there's a couple of things as well. We also need to be in control of what kind of data, the underlying data you would like to work on.
Hi, Lau, we have a question. Do you mind if I stop you there?
That's fine.
Sagar, do you want to come in?
Sorry to asking the late question about the first slide.
No,
so you mentioned that we can achieve the flow for the outside of the Dynamics 365 FO, right?
Yeah.
So it's a kind of integration testing flow.
It's a what? Sorry, flow.
Integration testing, we can
It could be. It could be. Yeah, let's just dwell on that, because I think that this is one of the, as I mentioned before, the big limitations. What do we do outside these apps? So I don't know how many is aware, but as part of the Power Platform, Microsoft recently introduced what they called UI flows, and that's basically a tool that allow you to record whatever is happening in an app or a browser or some old legacy system or what have you. So it is possible to use desktop flow to record what's happening in other systems, and then you can use that as part of your regression test. And then if it was an integration, you might be able to record a desktop flow saying that, well, now we have created some kind of file. That file has been placed in a shared folder, for instance, and then eventually that file will go into Azure or something like that. It is possible to use the desktop flow to handle those kind of recordings, and subsequent you can use it for testing. The problem is it's not at all tied into Azure DevOps. It's not at all tied into the regression suite tool. But it is possible to look into that direction. And that's actually one of the things Microsoft is looking into, how to complete the story more when we talk about regression testing across their portfolio of products. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so the desktop flow is the different application, right?
Yes, that's part of the Power Platform.
Okay.
It's part of the Power Automate.
Okay, thank you.
I can also just add on top of that, Microsoft in May acquired a company called Win Automation, which is one of the big players when it comes to robotic process automation. So it's, if you know companies like UiPath and similar, they are way up there. So Microsoft is currently trying to integrate using Win Automation software into this desktop flow application. So it's going to be interesting, because I think this is something that's for the future when we talk about testing and regression testing.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else there, Paul?
No.
Nothing at the moment, no.
All right, I'll continue. So I think there was a couple of other things that you need to take into account. Obviously, the data that you would like to do your test on. The data is not really important when you do your recording, because you can always change that data. But when you actually, run your test, it is important, because you might expect certain data to be like reference data to be in place for your test case to work. So just something to bear in mind. And finally, there's the warehousing app, which is it's not a beautiful story Microsoft has put together. For those of you who has looked into how that works, it's actually Microsoft has created a coding system just for the warehousing app. So in order to make the regression test work with the warehousing app, you actually need a task recording of the task recording. So it's not a beautiful story, and it only works on tier 1 environment, which is another big limitations. And Microsoft is aware of this, but I don't know why they haven't really moved on that to make it work on a proper, like a tier 1 test environment or what have you. Just something to bear in mind. So that's the overview of what's happening. And I can just say I've just been on a call with another client a couple of hours ago, and when they saw this, they were like, "There's a lot of moving parts here." So that's one of the big challenges when we discuss, at least with here in Scales with clients. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot to take in, but that's basically the story as it is of now. Okay, so moving on to some of the new bits and pieces in version 2.0, and I'll also look at some limitations. I've already touched upon some of them. But obviously the big change with the RSAT version 2.0 is the way that we work with this Excel spreadsheet that has the parameters. And you can see an example of the new view. Before, all the data, if you were recording like creation of a new customer, for instance, you would have entered a customer number. You would have entered an address and maybe a name, a customer group, etc. And depending on where you were in the application, all that data will just have been, spread across different pages of the same spreadsheet. And it was very difficult for a non-technical guy to sort of figuring out what this data actually related to. So now they've actually created a really nice way that you're not really in any doubt what the data is and where you have keyed it in. It just basically follows your task recording that you've done. So a massive change and an improvement over the older version 1.2 of the regression tool. So that's really handy. So there is additional some support for validation actions. And this is actually as part of the task recording. I think this was part of version 10.0.14 and 10.0.15 of finance and operations, where as part of the task recording itself, you could also start validating if certain menu item was available, if certain controls were editable, because one of the biggest challenges when you could easily record something and that was just fine, and then you might record it with another user's credential or in another role, and then all of a sudden nothing worked because it couldn't see the menu items, it couldn't see this, it couldn't do that. So Microsoft has added some more flavor to when you do your task recordings. And then obviously for the commerce side of things, it's possible to work with your POS systems. We are not a commerce house here in Denmark, but I'm sure that if some of you already know that if you're in the commerce side of things. Then some smaller bits, some additional features like you cannot by mistake accidentally overwrite things that's happening in DevOps, etc. And then the command line has more information. The command line being that you do not need the user interface of the tool in order to be able to execute your tests. So they have added some more flavor to that. So it's nothing major, but the spreadsheet was definitely a huge improvement to where we came from before. I think people who's worked with it for a while can agree on that.
Hi, Lars. Lars, sorry, we've got a question.
Yeah.
From, apologies, I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Kanjal.
Yes, that was.
There you go.
That was correct. So you said the Excel worksheet has changed. What happens to customers that are already using the RSAT tool with the previous Excel worksheet?
Still works.
Upgrade. Okay.
It still works, but if you want to obviously if you want to use the new features, the new view, you have to recreate those spreadsheets. And then obviously for people who's worked with this for a while, we have the possibility of chaining inputs and outputs. You obviously need to recreate that. I have heard a rumor that Microsoft are working on some kind of tool that will help that transition, but I haven't heard any ETA on that.
Okay, so we just have to recreate. If we want to change, it'll work as it is, even if you upgrade. But if you do want to change to the new one, all we would need to do is re-upload the scripts and then put in the variable chains again. Yeah.
So you shouldn't change your recording. Your recording is fine.
Right.
So you will have to recreate the parameter sheet, I think it's called, or test parameter sheet, or something like that. And then obviously if you've made any changes as to, chaining of variables, then you obviously need to add that to it as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi guys, just before we start, when we've asked the question, can we please put our hands down, please? Cigar, you put your hand down.
Or is there another question maybe?
Oh, unless you've got another question.
Oh, you only get one question, that's it. That's only fair.
Oh dear, I don't know if it's I don't know. Anyway, carry on. No,
I'll jot on.
Okay.
So limitations. I've mentioned some of them before. So obviously we cannot work outside of finance and operations and commerce. There are still these are my findings, and obviously with whatever's out there, but there are still some controls on different forms within the application that cannot be handled by this. Microsoft still have a few JavaScript controls in there. There is one when you see the dates on an expense report, things like that. There's a few controls that it just doesn't work with. So, but as of now, it's still been possible to do a workaround. But the problem with that is it's not really how people work in the business, and I think that's a bit of a problem. And for those of you who's on the preview version, you've probably seen the new production floor execution user interface, which looks absolutely amazing. The problem with that is that the regression tests tool is not working on that, because we're talking about a brand new way of showing the controls, showing the menu items. It's all based on I can't remember. It's a specific style sheet that Microsoft has introduced. So and we're just seeing that the application side of things, where Microsoft introduces new features, it's not really picked up straight away by the guys who are working on the regression tool, and that is causing some problems. Other areas, we cannot obviously record embedded Power Apps because we are basically outside of finance and operations. Office add-in, same story. So we had a lot of problems with the new grid control and the saved views. There still is. And again, it's a story where we can see that it's difficult for the guys who are working on the tool to keep up with whatever Microsoft is pushing into the application. So and obviously you can't validate on reports and etc. So there's a lot of things that even though it works on the application, the finance and operations application, there's still some limitations within the application that you need to be aware of. Okay, so, and if you have more things, we can always discuss them later on when we have the open discussion. So that was basically it around the news, the limitations, what it is, and so I'm going to have just a one slider on customer learnings, because as I mentioned in the introduction, we're seeing problems getting this over the table, but we have good stories. This is one of the story where this is a life science industry, so obviously people who know that industry knows that test is their bread and butter. And they would invite a lot of people from the business to do the testing for each release, and we were talking about these 8 releases a year, and they also, on top of that, they needed some people from IT. And so they ended up spending quite a lot of time bringing in, key users from the business to help do the test. So they have spent a lot of time, as the bullet number 2 here basically say, they have more than 900 test cases, which is quite a lot, at least in my book. But it's also taken them quite a while to get there, to have more or less all the processes available for automated tests. So, and they're currently still working on it. But there's and I speak to these people often and get some inputs on where they are and what they think, etc. And they still believe that this was well worth the investment to go down this road. It's definitely freed up a lot of people. Being in the life science industry, they also have the better possibility to actually show and display what they've actually tested, for auditing purposes, etc. And they're very happy with the tool, but they're still aware of there are areas where they still need to do manual testing, but so be it. So I mean, it should be a good story, but it is for a lot of clients, at least in Denmark, it is a difficult story. They see a lot of work up front, and they can't really see towards the end result. So that is one of the big problems. So at least in Scales, we've been working on some kind of offering, and this will come to the conclusion of my slides here soon. So we're trying to come up with some kind of offering that can help these customers to get on the right path. Obviously, they need to think that it's a good idea, but I mean, we can do training on the product. We can do training on this is what you need to set up, and then we can say, well, that's it. That's what's done. You can continue to work, but we just see that the clients just don't do it. So we need a better offering in order to hold their hands, to move forward, to get the ball rolling, to get some success stories also, in order to see that there's actually a benefit at the, if you like, at the end of the rainbow. So I hope that this might be something that we can discuss in a few minutes, what kind of takes that you have on it. Yeah, and this is basically just a project plan for a customer that we actually worked on, and Heidi, who's also on the call, if you like, can probably elaborate a little bit on this. So that's basically what we had to bring to the table today. I can obviously go into a lot more details, but I'm not sure that's what we need. So if there's any closing questions before we open the floor.
Any questions from anyone? Must be something.
Maybe it was just so crystal clear that yeah, makes sense.
Maybe, Lau, yeah, maybe. Do we need a break to get a coffee and think about some questions that we're going to ask Lau? Hands up if that's a good idea. Oh, Mark.
Yeah, hey Lau, this is Mark Wilson from Alithia in the US. I was just looking over your offering on the slide that you just covered, and I just wanted to just understand a little bit more. In this scenario, how many test cases are you going to help a customer address in this plan? Do you have is there a quantity there, or are you just simply getting them to the place where they're comfortable setting this up and running it themselves? I just want to make sure I was clear.
Yeah. That's it depends on the scope and plan, obviously, but our take on this is that we got a process up and running for finance, for instance, and we got a process up and running for sales. Mm-hmm. So that is the take. It's not like, well, we got just a tiny task recording and then you have to continue it, because it's easy. It's very easy to create just the standalone task recording. The difficult part is actually to visualize how that specific task recording will fit into a bigger picture, like a complete process. That's where a lot of the time needs to be spent in order to plan your process correctly. So we will carry the customer through that.
Okay. I think I follow. So thank you.
We've got a couple more questions, Lau. Yeah. So Kanjal again, do you want to unmute yourself? We'll come to you next, Peter.
Yes. So have you run across a situation where you have multiple processes that you're testing at the same time, which requires some of the same test scripts?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I mean, it is possible that, for several processes that you would like to test, there's the same recording, like, well, we need to create an item in order to run our process, things like that. So we have that, and you can always use the same task recording over and over again in different processes. One thing to obviously bear in mind is that, if you're expecting a certain input in order to create your item, obviously that needs to be present in both processes and things like that. So there's a little bit of planning that if you can reuse that. But the whole thing about the regression test is you can't really run anything in parallel. And that's also, I haven't put that in, but that's also one of the limitations with this product. You have to run everything sequentially.
Okay, so I thought that there was something or some new feature they were introducing where you could run at the same time. So let's for example, let's say I have two different sales order processes I want to test, right?
Yeah.
They both require you to use the same script of creating a sales order.
Yeah.
And then they kind of take a different path. I thought there was a feature, and I can't remember what it's called or what I thought it was called, but basically that you could run both those processes as two separate, processes, but running at the same time.
Are you thinking about the derived tests?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, but the derived tests are basically it's also sequential. The derived test is basically that the task recording is the same, but I can have separate, Excel sheets to cover the data I would like to use. But they still run sequentially. It's not in parallel.
I see.
So it's not like, so it's not like I will start some process and then in parallel I'll create two sales order and then I'll come back. No, it'll create one sales order and then it'll create the next sales order and then come back. Does that make sense?
Oh, so it kind of finishes the first sales order, does the process, and then creates a second sales order?
Yes.
And then does the second process?
Yes. That's another limitations that we're seeing. We can't really run this in parallel. You can sort of cheat because you can obviously install more software on more boxes. So you might have, a box where, you have a test manager that's in control of the supply chain area. And then you can have another box where it's the finance that's been tested. And then you can sort of run it in parallel. But it's not really what at least the clients we are talking with is looking for. They're looking for, proper parallelism.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. There was another. Was it Peter or something?
Peter from Seaton.
Thank you. This is Peter from Seaton Partners. First of all, thank you, Lau, for a great introduction and overview. That was great.
Cheers.
Thanks for that. I do have a few questions, if I may. First of all, we have been using RSAT for a while, and one of our clients, they are really keen to get some test evidence report. Obviously, all the data will be appearing in the system and got DevOps and covering all the execution, etc. Do you have any other way of presenting the test evidence in a consolidated way or easier presentation?
So you're thinking about taking the result of the test cases and putting them into some kind of report for safekeeping or something like that?
Yeah, some of clients, they will be audited and they want to have some sort of report in place to prove you have done so many execution and so many pass and fail and executed by different people at a certain date for certain platform updates, those kind of details.
Right. I think the short answer is no. So no, we don't have that. I'm thinking that I'm thinking it should be possible because there is, if you're a quick hand in programming, it's possible to get that information out of DevOps. There's a lot of APIs where you can sort of get the information out of, and then you might be able to present it through a report or something. But we don't have anything like that. But the data is there, so it should be doable to do something. But we don't have anything.
Okay, thank you. If I may just follow up with another question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I do recognize there are a few limitations. For example, that warehouse app one, it's really exciting news to get that involved, but there are some limitations. And also you mentioned about production floor execution is not there yet.
Yeah.
Are you aware any like roadmap to get them included or improved in the future?
No, unfortunately not. I mean, let's start with the production floor because that's brand new. So I have already posted some information to Microsoft on that. I can't get that to work, but I also know there are only like 3 or 4 people in the group that actually works with the regression tool, so I'm sure they're quite busy. So I don't know about that one, but I can say that for the warehouse app and the limitation about the tier 1 box, that was actually something I posted to Microsoft as a problem over a year ago. So that's a long time ago, and nothing's happened, and I don't know why. But yeah, I know. Yeah, so it's difficult.
Yeah, I think we can just utilize the best with what we can really, and not to focus on the limitations.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, and Steve, you've got a question for Lau?
Oh, hi, yeah, thank you, and thanks for a great presentation. It's just a quick question, really. In regards to the continuous upgrades with Microsoft, what percentage of kind of task recordings and processes would we be looking to test using RSAT? Do you think? What would be typical?
That is the $1 million question, isn't it? We find that is very different from clients to clients because it depends really on how much effort they would like to put into it. I mean, we have this life science client there. I think they're probably up to around, when they get everything up and running, they're probably around 80-90% of their processes. And then there's some integrations and other bits they need to do manually. And then we're in talks with clients that are like, well, we'll like to test our 3 most critical processes, and that might only cover like 20% of their business or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's and I think it's a good question because it's an important question to sort of scope and plan and set the setting correctly with the client so they're not taken aback about the amount of work. You can get a benefit with only a small amount of work, but it takes some thinking to get to that point, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
Thanks, Steve, for that question. Sagar, you're back again. Do you want to fire away?
Yeah. So the similar question. So you have any data or any real case study that shows how many manual efforts can be saved by using the RSAT tool?
No.
Oh.
Sorry. We don't.
That was a quick answer.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be.
Have we got any more questions at all? No?
Maybe they'll come up when we
Yeah,
move
maybe.
the floor.
Maybe.